Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is the title story, and it is titled "Neighbor Trespassed and Released a Rattlesnake into My RV." I know that from the title alone you might be thinking that I am exaggerating something. I promise you that not only is this a true story, but the title does not even begin to explain how weird of an experience this was. Now, I live in an area that, depending on who you are, you might see us and classify us as rednecks. Me and neighbor both live in an RV park next to each other. We absolutely hate each other and get in pretty consistent arguments. I also cannot really just move my RV somewhere else because the park is full of a lot more people recently living in the park. Nobody would switch with me because, well, nobody wanted to be next to neighbor if they could help it. Out of everyone, he was probably the loudest owner there and would get drunk almost every single night. While he was sober or drunk though, he always wanted to start fights about anything he could think of. This time though, we were in an argument because he did not like where I started throwing out my garbage. He considered it his spot for whatever reason and decided he needed to create a huge stink about it. There are no designated spots either, so I really don't know what he was on about. All I know is that I started waking up to trash right by my door, and I was not going to back down and let him get away with it. What followed was several days of retaliation of putting trash on each other's properties after asking him to stop and not getting anywhere with that. I really didn't think things would escalate to where they did from just that. I guess though that he really did not like the idea of anyone trying to fight back against him, so he was going to do something crazy like the guy he is and trying to get me killed. I did not even know what was going on at first though, because I saw him close to my RV and honestly thought he was putting more trash near it. Me? Get away from my home! Neighbor?
That's not a nice way to talk to your neighbor.
Me? What the hell are you doing over here?
You will see.
We walked away and I went to look where he was to see if any more trash got dumped. It did not seem like he did though, so I just brushed it off as him trying to piss me off and rile me up. I did not think anything else of it, so I went back into my RV to try and relax for a while. Everything seemed pretty normal, and then I saw something moving on my floor. It was a snake, and I would say right now that I'm not a huge fan of snakes. I'm sure that he was right outside enjoying my screams of terror. Luckily, I was in arm's reach of my kitchen and was able to grab one of those big knives for cooking. The snake was looking at me like I was dinner and starting to jut out towards me. I swung the knife like a maniac, trying to keep it back so it couldn't bite me. I will admit that it was pure luck that the timing ended up with the knife slicing the snake and having it die right there on my floor. I didn't like this, but a dead rattlesnake on my floor was better than a living one trying to kill me. I knew right away that neighbor put him there, so I called the police and animal control. That was when they identified it as a rattlesnake, but there was something very odd about it. On its tail the rattle was missing, so I was not able to hear it coming towards me until it was right there. They say that it looked like it had been ripped right off of the snake. That would explain why it was so angry and wanting to attack though. The neighbor literally ripped the rattle off of the snake. Now, I did not have any solid proof that he was the one that did it, but me seeing him by my property right before gave them enough suspicion to go and talk to him. He actually was dumb enough to let them into his RV where they saw the rattlesnake's rattle just sitting there. He was arrested and taken away screaming that I set him up and he was innocent. It was clear though that the cops did not believe him, and after a few more questions for me, they left my RV as well, thankfully with the dead snake for evidence. I did have to go to court to give my side of the story of what happened so the judge could get a clear picture of what happened before anything else. So I told him, and while I was sitting there listening to other things, I found out that he did in fact admit to ripping off the snake's rattle using his hands, a knife, and even his own teeth. Still, it probably would have only been a misdemeanor and gotten off easy if he had a half-decent lawyer and seemed sorry. Obviously, that is not what happened if you've been paying attention to what this guy was like. The entire time I was trying to recount the events, he was interrupting me and having the judge warn him to stop. Before the entire thing was over, he was removed from the courtroom for not being able to shut his mouth and behave. It was kind of unbelievable that he was acting that way in front of the judge that was going to decide to send him away with a fine and warning or send him to a criminal trial. Turns out, at the end of the day, they charged him for what was probably the highest counts they could get away with. Abuse of an animal, trespassing, and deadly conduct because of what the rattlesnake could have done if I didn't kill it first. The trial has not happened yet, but he is in custody because he has no money to pay for the bail in the meantime. His RV is still parked next to me, but since he cannot pay for obvious reasons, it will probably get towed away soon to make room for someone that can pay. To think that all of this could have been avoided if he didn't throw a fit about me throwing my garbage in his spot and then turning up the fight to 100 by thinking releasing a snake to attack me was a good idea. I still have no idea where he got the snake from because rattlesnakes are not really native here, so it must have been the most thought out plan he ever came up with since he moved in next to me. And ripe stars, if you enjoy the stories about crazy neighbors, then I would really appreciate it if you could also like the video, because recently we have pretty much always achieved over 1000 likes on the videos, which is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much in advance, and thank you for your continuous support. The next one is titled, Don't Like It? Leave. When I was younger, I worked as an engineer for a small company. The owner, who I will call Jake, let me know before I started that I would be doing about 10-hour days, 6 days a week for about 6 months, but also that I would have to be flexible. Some days they wouldn't have work for me, and other days I would be expected to stay a few hours late. This did not bother me too much as I was not too tight for money, and I did not mind staying behind a few extra hours occasionally. I got to work and was told to follow instructions from the owner's brother Steve. He was an arrogant character who always thought he knew how to do everyone else's job better than them. We butted heads a few times, but nothing major. A few months in, I found a new job starting in a week that paid better. Later on that day, I had another disagreement with Steve. The situation was petty, but it's his response that really confused me. It ended with him screaming in my face,
If you don't do as I say, then you can leave.
So I packed my stuff and left. Steve was a little confused, thinking I would just fall in line. He was too arrogant to apologize, and I had a job lined up. Side note for people not in the UK, I was working a 0-hour contract. This means I get an hourly wage, but I'm not afforded some labor rights like a set salary, minimum work hours, or notice for dismissal. This works both ways though, so I can leave the job whenever I want with no notice. I decided to call up Jake since he had always been chill and told him what happened. He told me he needed me and I should just return to work. I told him unless he controlled Steve and made him apologize, there was no way I was coming back. He refused, so I told him I will send in my final timesheet. 2 weeks later and I've started my new job. I still have not been paid for my final week, so I called Jake. He told me that,
Since you didn't give notice for leaving, you owe me for last product of work.
He said if I didn't like it, I should sue him and recommend I should just take the loss and move on. This was obviously complete BS. A couple months go by until I finally find time to file for small claims court. Few days after sending him notice, Jake paid my money including court fees and extras. He actually called me up apologizing for the confusion. He wanted to know when I could return to work. I had heard from one of my ex-co-workers that because of the infrequent hours, people would leave as soon as they were told they wouldn't have work the next day. Others would leave when they realized how much of a jerk Steve was. They had gone through about 7 different workers in the time I was gone and struggled to keep anyone for more than a week. I told him I would think about it. I managed to string him along for a few weeks before he stopped calling me. The moral of the story is that if you think you're being treated unfairly, you shouldn't just put up with it. Your self-respect is not worth compromising. Don't settle for being treated like crap, especially when you're willing to go above and beyond for them. And yeah, ripe stars, I would say that's a very good motto to live by. I think having a decent amount of self-respect is extremely crucial, especially when you want to keep a good life-work balance. The next one is titled Work with the Scanner. Background: I used to work at a car manufacturer whose name rhymes with Wanda. And I gotta say, ripe stars, I was thinking for a few minutes now what sort of car manufacturer OP is talking about, and I just cannot seem to get it. If you know who he is talking about, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, my job was to pick up trains of carts full of parts from the warehouse with a motorized cart puller. Take them to a sections, the assembly line, and take the empty carts back to the warehouse to be refilled. There were about 20 of us doing this job, all on a different route. The way the factory was set up created a narrow path that only a single train could fit through at a time. This bottleneck was shared by 3 routes, which made it nearly impossible to complete Route X, the furthest, in a timely manner. We had scanners that told us exactly which train of carts to pick up next and which empty carts to collect. On to the story. As you may have gathered by now, Route X was not popular with us worker bees. If you followed the scanner, you would regularly fall behind while you waited for the bottleneck to clear. The solution us worker bees came up with: we combined a couple of small trains to reduce the number of trips we needed to make, saving us time and allowing us to keep up with the deliveries. All was good until management clued in to what we were doing. We were told that the
scanner tells you what to do. We don't pay you to think. Follow the scanner.
I happened to be assigned Route X right after we got chewed out, so I thought, okay, I will follow the damn scanner. Well guys, the scanner, or all you had to do was follow the damn train, CJ. Anyway, I watched as the amount of reserve parts at the line dwindled. Did I care? Nope. I was following my scanner. By the time management noticed, my route was down to less than 5 reserve parts at the line. These are used at a rate of 1 per minute. Did I care? Nope. I was still happily following my scanner. It took 3 managers helping out to get Route X back up to an acceptable state by the end of the shift. And when they asked me what went wrong, I said, I don't know boss, I was just following my scanner. The fallout: the company investigated the layout of their routes and did some reorganization to avoid the bottleneck. Took a couple months, but Route X was finally fixed. The next one is titled Mixer Malicious Compliance. Years ago, I worked for a high-end contracting company. It was a small business, about 10 people total, including the 3 owners. 2 of them were brothers and were in charge of large renovations, and the third was in charge of all the custom cabinetry and high-end furniture we made in the shop. He was my direct boss. I only ever interacted with the brothers occasionally, normally in the mornings and afternoon when they would come to pick up and drop off tools in the cargo van. Part of my job duties every day included cleaning up their tools and putting them away, and I cannot leave until it is done. Now the brothers had a bad habit of never washing the mixing stick for cement. Every day it would come back caked in dried concrete that I would have to spend up to an hour breaking off. I had asked them several times to just wash it down with a hose after they used it, but was always met with,
"Oh yeah, we'll remember next time."
After a few months of this, I was getting pretty frustrated. One extremely hot summer day, I was sitting on the dock of the shop waiting for them. I was caked in sweat and sawdust from making cabinets all day, and I was in a bad mood. They pull up and we start unloading. Lo and behold, they had not cleaned the stick again. The base of it was practically a complete ball. Me? Seriously? What the hell? B1.
"Oh yeah, sorry."
Me? How hard is it to wash it off? I have asked for months. B2.
"It is your job to clean it. Just clean it."
Cue the malicious compliance. I lifted it up, brought my arm back and swung it as hard as I could at the side door of the cargo van. The sound of denting metal was huge. Most of the concrete blasted off of it. I handed the stick to the flabbergasted brother and said, "There, I cleaned it," before walking back into the shop. Both brothers wanted to fire me but couldn't. The third guy was my boss and refused as well. He told me a month later that every time he saw the dent he laughed and they always brought it back clean afterwards. Obligatory edit: to those that ask why I didn't just bang it all the time, it's a $15 tool. If I banged it clean each day, it would be so bent that it would need to be replaced each week. That gets expensive. To those that ask why I didn't have to pay for damage to the van, it was a paid-off brutalized van already. My hourly rate was more than the cost of repair for the several months I cleaned it. Since it was already dented, another one did not matter in the grand scheme. The next one is titled Wake Up the Boss. I supervised a glass manufacturing department. One night we had an issue with a thermocouple that controls the temperature of the glass. Because it was creating nuisance alarms, the operator disconnected it and forgot to notify the next shift to monitor it manually. We lost control of the furnace for a couple of hours and scraped product. The plant manager came in that morning, screaming, and ripped the entire staff a new one. We were trying to explain that the thermocouple needed to be fixed, but instead he continued to yell at us, tell us we were idiots, and told us to monitor it and notify him every time it went into alarm, or else he would fire us. To further reprimand us, he insisted that we call him at home in the evening every time that temperature went into alarm, so he could ensure we were doing our jobs. What he did not know, and what we knew, was that the alarm for the broken thermocouple happened about every 15 minutes. My operator was worried and asked me what he should do. Since the plant manager was so insistent, I told the operator to wait until after midnight and then call and inform him every time it happened according to his direct request. The plant manager came into work the next morning, very bleary-eyed, and sheepishly told us that we did not have to do that again. He finally listened to us and we got the problem fixed. And the next one is titled New A-hole in a peaceful neighborhood learns his lesson. So I live in a quiet little town in the Midwestern United States. My house is the last house at the end of a sleepy little dead-end road. New guy moves in next door, let's call him Dick. Dick was probably one of those guys who was so popular in high school that he thought he had made it without doing any work and tried to spend the rest of his life living off of being the cool guy. The type of guy who drives a lifted truck and a motorcycle. Don't get me wrong, I ride motorcycles myself. What I don't do is sit in my driveway at 2 AM and rev my engine. There is a bit of a downhill slope from the middle of the street to our houses at the end, and Dick likes to race down this hill and then lock his brakes and drift into his driveway. The first winter after he moved in, I noticed that my mailbox has been crushed and there's fresh tire tracks in the snow leading down the street over my mailbox and into his driveway. A few days later, I see Dick standing outside and ask about this. He denies the entire thing, says he doesn't know what happened to my mailbox and that it must have been a delivery guy or something. I figure whatever and fix my mailbox. A few months later the same thing happens again. I fixed my mailbox and move on. Sometime later this happens yet again. This time I'm pretty pissed. So I talked to my cousin who is a commercial welder and had him make me a mailbox out of some scrap 1/4-inch steel plate which was mounted on a length of old railroad track for its post. A little bit of glue and some cedar shingles and you would never know it wasn't a typical wooden mailbox. And also, the railroad track post was sunk in concrete 4 feet into the ground. For the next several weeks I waited with anticipation every time I heard his truck roaring down the street, but nothing. Until about 5 months later when I heard his truck and then a crash. By this time I had forgotten about my mailbox and thought for sure he had struck another car. I ran out to the street to see if anyone needed help and there was his truck broadside against my mailbox, all smashed up. He saw me walk up and started yelling about how I had destroyed his truck and he would make me pay, and he called the cops. A cop showed up to take his report and Dick pointed out how my mailbox had been specifically designed to destroy his truck. I gotta admit I got nervous at this point. The cop looked around at the truck and the construction of the mailbox and then turned back to us and asked me if I had trouble with my mailbox before. I explained how it has been smashed several times in the past year and the cop then said, "It is pretty clear what happened here. This is an obvious case of wanton destruction of property." My heart sunk to the ground and Dick got a smug look on his face, but then cop turns to Dick and says,
I'm going to issue a citation for this, as well as reckless driving.
You should have seen Dick's face at this point. He was boiling with rage as the cop wrote him 2 tickets and told him he needed to pay for the repair of the damaged wood on my mailbox. The metal was fine, had not even tilted it, but the wood camouflage had broken off. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel, but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously, and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.